Hello developers! In this section we are going to be talking about the Hibernate N+1 issue. We will learn how to identify scenarios in which this effect may appear, and also how to avoid this. But first things first, let's see what's actually an N+1 issue. Well, it occurs whenever you use fetch type lazy for association in entity classes. Whenever performing a query to select the n entities, let's say, and using any access methods of your entity's lazy association, Hibernate will perform n additional queries to load objects. So to verify that, with practical example, I have created here a demo application, and let's say that we have a requirement from the business side, and the requirement says something like this: for a given user ID, I want to see user's first name, last name, and platform names for which user has credentials. So this should be done within this endpoint over here, and as a response we have this record which will contain the first name, last name, and the platform names. Okay, so our business logic will be implemented in the user service implementation right here, and we have this method assigned for this responsibility, and as an entity we have the user, which has the ID, the first name, the last name, and a set of credentials. And in the credentials entity we have the platform, which we are interested in getting for the response, and platform username and password. Okay, now let's try to evaluate once again, now that we have a clear understanding of what entities are we having in this application. Let's try to understand a bit the requirement. Okay, so as you can see, the first name and the last name are part of the user entity, but the platform names, so those are in the credentials, in the set of the credentials for the user, right? So in order for us to return such a response, we need to get the user from the database alongside with its credentials and parse the name of the platforms for which he has credentials and return the response. So let's go into the service method and try to implement this. If we look closer, we have a method similar to this one, and the big difference is in this method we are only returning data that is specifically for the user. So we have the ID, the first name, and the last name. And the way that we do the return in this method is using user repository find by ID. So you may be tempted to use the same API like in this method, and if we do so, let's see what happens in our use case, which by the way it's different from this one below. So let's try to get the user from the database, okay, using the find by ID, parsing the ID from the method, okay, and let's say that we want to return an entity not found exception for the case that we don't have this user with the given ID in our database. Then what we need to do, we will need to get the platform names. So for that we will do something like the following. So we have the platform names, which are going to be get like this. We'll get the credentials, and then we will stream the data and map it to the credential get platform. Then we are going to collect it into an unmodifiable set. Then what we need to do is just basically construct the response object, user with platform names response, which will have the user first name, user last name, and the platform names. Well, this is just an example, but in terms of business requirements, we pretty much covered everything at this point. But let's try to run our application and see what's happening. Please note that I have enabled the SQL into our console so that we can have a better understanding of what Hibernate is querying from our database. Okay, so let's try to first let's add some breakpoints here. I think I haven't added. Right, so let's add some breakpoints and let's create a request with the user ID 1. Okay, and see what happens. Okay, so let's clear the logs. Okay, well, up until this point we have Hibernate select for our database, in which we are getting the user first name, last name, and the ID. Okay, but we need the credentials, and from the credentials we need the platform, right? So by using the get credentials, we will see that the Hibernate is executing another query, and this query will fetch all the credentials for that particular user. So we will end up in executing two queries for those platform names. And imagine that this is just an isolated example, right? So as we can see, we have here the response, which contains the name John and the platform names. But the major problem here is that this is an isolated example, and maybe we want to return this response for a list of users. For all the users, we want to see the same response, and this means that for each user, let's say that we have 100,000 users in our database. For each individual user, Hibernate will execute another query to fetch all the credentials for that particular user. So this will cause a lot of performance issues, and how can we avoid this is by creating a new query, and we will name it something like this: find with credentials fetched for ID, which in terms of where closing, it's the same as the find by ID. But what are we additionally doing here is that we are building our own query, and by building our own query, which is of type JPQL, we can specify that we want to select the user from from user join fetch user credentials where user dot id equals to id. So this is nothing but the same query as the find by id, except that within this query we will fetch also the credentials. And if we use this into our application, into this method, we will see what changed in terms of querying for user. Okay, so we will call this find user and we will parse the id given, and let's run again the application. We will keep the breakpoints here because we are interested in the Hibernate select query. Okay, right, so application started. Let's clear the logs. Okay, and let's try to do another request for the user, and let's go to the console. Let's clear it up. Okay, let's see what happens. Right, so now in the select statement that we see here, it's not only fetching the user data but also the credentials. So everything will happen in one select statement, and then here at the line 24 we'll see that nothing into the Hibernate was printed again because it was only one select statement. Be very careful when you are working with child entities and make sure that you don't end up with N+1 issues. So thank you very much for watching and see you in the next one. Bye.